Do you know how to read and interpret a scientific study? Because if not, you're just leaving yourself wide open to be manipulated by people that reference scientific studies to prove certain points they're trying to make. I'm Mike, this is Project Archangel, and today I'm going to try to give you a basic overview of how to read and interpret scientific research papers. Now, I'm trying to keep this very simple as possible, because this is not meant to be even more confusing than the subject already is, but instead give you some tools that you can apply to figure out if a claim that someone makes about a scientific result is actually valid, or if that person is trying to use a biased representation of that science in order to manipulate you. Every day, the mainstream media presents us the latest scientific facts. The wording is usually something like scientists have discovered, science has proven that, or a new study has shown that. Most of the time, those articles are heavily biased if the claims that are made are not outright false. Even if you read the original studies, it's quite easy to misinterpret the results because there is a lot of jargon that is being used and so-called technical terms to make that study sound more sciencey and less understandable to laymen. If you want to understand what conclusions can actually be drawn from certain tests, surveys, or experiments, you have to look at the details of how that experiment was designed and conducted. The most important thing you have to look at is the test group and the control group. So the test group is the group of test subjects that's actually tested or surveyed, and the control group is just a group that represents the average person of the target population. Now, the target population is the group of people that you want to apply the results of your experiment to. That means that if you want to apply the result of a scientific study to yourself, you have to make sure that you are actually a fitting part of that control group or that target population. A lot of experiments are done on animals, and animal experiment results are not one-to-one applicable to humans. Now, there could be some similarities. That's why we're doing animal testing before we do human testing. But you can't just imply that the results of an animal research study is the same as a human research study. I'll give you an example. This is from a research paper that was done about 25 years ago. I tried to find the original paper. I have read it in the past. I couldn't find it anymore. So please don't take this result that I'm quoting right now as the latest in science. It's 25 years old, and that is a fucking long time. So the research I'm talking about is a research that was not quoted, but referenced very, very often in bodybuilding magazines, because they were trying to sell you amino acid tablets that included arginine and ornithine. And the claim was that a study has shown that if you give arginine and ornithine in combination, the test subjects increased their growth hormone production by 300%. Sounds great. Let's buy that shit, right? And I bought that shit. I'm not gonna lie. And I read the original study probably 10, 15 years later. So the original study, first of all, is done on rats, not on humans. You might think they would have wanted to mention that, right? But they didn't. And for good reason, because they didn't mention a couple of other things either. They didn't mention that the route of administration was intravenously. Now, the product that was sold was oral tablets. So it's a different route of administration, which they didn't mention. The third thing is the amount of amino acids the rats got given. If you calculated it up to a human body weight ratio, would have been so high you could not even take those orally. Okay, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was a ridiculous amount of amino acids you would have had to swallow. And that would have basically wrecked their selling point. So the last point was, yes, there was an increase in growth hormone by 300%, but it was a rat's growth hormone, not human growth hormone. So looking at all that stuff, they fucking lied to you, didn't they? To sell their product. And like me, probably millions of people bought that stuff. Now, did they lie? No, not really. Because remember what they said. They said test subjects, which didn't specify whether they were rats or humans, but you assume it's humans because they are trying to sell the product to humans, right? Took the amino acids. Yeah, they took it. They didn't mention the route though, but they didn't lie either. They didn't say orally. They just said they took the amino acids. Third point was they didn't mention the amount of amino acids they would have to take. Why would they, right? They just go like, well, recommended dose is like fucking 4 pills a day or whatever. So they didn't mention the research study. They just mentioned what they would recommend that you take of that product. And they didn't specifically mention that it was a rat's growth hormone. They didn't say human growth hormone either. They just said growth hormone, which is correct. It's not a lie. It just implies certain things by omitting certain parts of the facts. But in the end, that's why it's your responsibility if you are making decisions that are, let's say, health related or in some other way life altering or very important, and you are relying on certain scientific research results to make your decision, you need to make absolutely sure to read and understand those scientific research papers you are trying to take into consideration for your decision. Everything else is just stupid. Okay? It's your responsibility to check. You can't just trust everyone. Now, of course, if you have a friend like a doctor and you know he reads all the science papers and understands it and he's not going to give you any bullshit, you can trust that guy. That's why it's important to have people around you that you can actually trust. Because otherwise you have to do all the work yourself, and I can guarantee you from my own experience, reading scientific research papers is not fun at all. Okay? I hate doing that. So some examples of control group or test group problems that you're going to run into where there's a big difference between you and the group that is actually being tested is whether it's human or animal testing, the age of the target population, the sex of the target population. Are you an athlete or are you sedentary or are you somewhat in between? Health and general lifestyle. Here's another example. There's a guy named Thomas DeLauer. He has a very professional channel. He gives fitness advice. The guy lost a lot of weight himself, so he knows what he's doing. I watched the channel for quite a while, and then I ran into one video especially that I was very interested because of an amazing scientific result he referenced. The experiment was about using 3 different compounds. I think it was an amino acid, then it was creatine and L-carnitine, to increase lean muscle mass without working out. And the increase in lean muscle mass that that experiment claimed was possible was in the pound range within 6 weeks. So this is something that is pretty much unheard of without working out, mind you. So I was like, okay, before I buy this stuff, I have to read that research. So I read the research. Here's the problem. Thomas DeLauer's viewers are athletes or people that want to become athletes. They want to lose weight, they want to gain muscle. They want to work for that. They want to change their diet for that. That's why they are trying to get his advice. So you assume that if he references a study like that, people will think it applies to them, right? Because it's showing it to them. But he completely forgets to mention that the study was done at the population of an elderly retirement home, and the target population was between 55 and 70 years old and led a sedentary lifestyle. And the sedentary lifestyle was a prerequisite for taking part in the experiment. Why? Because the experimenters didn't try to increase muscle mass in athletes. They tried to find something to increase muscle mass in old people that are losing muscle mass and that can't physically train anymore. And the research actually showed that the combination of those three supplements increased the muscle mass by, I don't know, 1.5 pounds within 6 weeks in that test population. Now, is that going to be applicable to a 20 or 30 or 40-year-old athlete? Fuck no. No way. This is the same thing as mega dosing vitamins, which is going to give you a result if you're vitamin deficient, but it's not going to do anything for you if you have enough vitamins and you're taking additional vitamins, right? So it's very important that you look at those studies yourself. You don't have to read the whole study. I mean, just looking at the abstract and looking at it and saying like retirement home, sedentary lifestyle, 55 to 70 years old, I don't have to read the rest. I know it's not applicable to me, okay? But if I don't do that and I trust that DeLauer, who is a professional, he puts out very professional, he's got a whole crew, he's got a film team, he's got a studio. And that was the first research of him that I checked. Now that doesn't look too good, does it? Now, of course, I could say that, all the other research is probably spotless, and I just picked the one of the thousands of things he quoted, and that was a total fuck up. But I highly doubt that. So be careful. Just because someone has a very successful channel on YouTube doesn't mean that if that guy is quoting scientific studies and making a whole video about it, that is actually factual and applicable for you. Now again, he didn't lie. He just left out things, and he knows better than that. Now I don't know if that was just like he trusted his team to vet these studies that they present him, if they pre-write stuff for him, or if he just said, fuck it, no one is going to read the study anyway. But again, it's your responsibility to make sure the stuff that you believe in is actually stuff you can believe in. As I said, you need to make sure that you are part of that target population. Now, if you are healthy, you are working out, you are not super stressed, you don't have any medical conditions, you don't smoke, you don't drink alcohol, then it's almost problematic to find a study that applies to you, because you are an outlier of the target population. Even if you are part of that group, you're not the average of that group. And scientific research always takes averages, or not always, but most of the time it takes the average of one group and compares it to the average of another group. And then if there is a significant difference, then it has to do with whatever was tested in that experiment. Very simply said. A good example for that is the male testosterone level. So after a certain age, the testosterone level declines. And men are always worried whether their testosterone level is too low, okay? Especially if they are athletic and if they are working out. They want to, have the best testosterone level possible. So you can look at the medically established range for certain age groups. Now, how are those ranges established? They are taken from the average of the current target population. Now, the current target population in 2020 is very different in the testosterone level to the same target population in 1950 or 1960 or even 2010. Because the averages of the male population in the industrial countries decreases every year. Now, that could be due to a lot of hormones in the food, in the water, whatever it is, doesn't matter. The fact is, the average testosterone level is decreasing every year. Now, if my doctor tests me and says, oh, your testosterone level is average, is that something that I think is good for me? Or do I rather want to have an average testosterone level for a guy in the 50s and 60s? Well, I know the answer for me. I'd rather be on the average level of a guy in the 1950s. And actually, as an athlete, I want to be at the top end of the range for a guy in the 1950s, not at the lower end of the range for a guy in the 2020s. Okay, because that's probably half the testosterone level than the top level of a guy 60 years ago. Next thing is funding. So you gotta know who is paying for the research that you're reading, because the tobacco industry, for example, has been funding lots of research to find out whether tobacco products, if smoked, would increase the risk for lung cancer. And if you believe just 1 second that the tobacco industry would allow a study that they paid for to be published, if that study actually found out that smoking causes cancer, I can't help you. So that example should be enough to make sure that you actually look at who paid for the study that you're looking at. A study normally will be peer reviewed. That means you send that study out to some other scientists that are subject matter experts, and they read through it and try to find flaws and mistakes in your study. And if they don't find anything, they'll give it a fucking check in the box and you're good to go. Then you can try to get your study published, because no reputable science magazine is going to publish a study that has not been peer reviewed. So if you read a study, or if someone references a study that has not been peer reviewed yet and is not currently in the process of being peer reviewed, you can be very suspicious about the quality of that study. In order to judge whether the result of an experiment is due to certain factors that were tested in that experiment, you are going to look at whether the result is significant. That means whether the difference between the test group and the control group is big enough to be able to say this is not due to just standard variation and coincidence. Okay, and there are certain numbers. It's called the alpha level. The alpha level can be chosen by the experimenter, and the alpha levels are 0.05, and that means you have a 5% chance of that result being due to coincidence. That level is not high enough for most scientific publications, because that means there's a 1 in 20 chance that the whole result of that study is just due to coincidence, which means that if a journal would publish 20 of those studies, 1 would be false. And a scientific journal cannot afford that. So they usually require a 0.01, which means 1% chance, or even a 0.001, which means a 1 in 1,000 chance that the result is due to coincidence. If someone says the study showed a significant result, you need to look at the alpha level and see what they chose. Another thing is cause or correlation. Cause means a change in one factor caused the change in another factor. For example, high blood sugar causes diabetes. That means if A, your blood sugar increases, B, your chance of getting diabetes increases also. A correlation means if you have high blood sugar, the chance that you have diabetes is high as well. Okay, so you see a lot of people with high blood sugar and diabetes, but you can't say whether the high blood sugar caused the diabetes or the diabetes caused the high blood sugar, or a third factor, high blood pressure or whatever you want to pick, caused both. A lot of times, however, people take this correlation and claim that it's a causal effect. So you need to be careful how that test has been designed. A survey, if you just look at numbers in populations, can never determine a causal effect because you're just looking at one point in time. The final thing I want to talk about is the number of factors that can affect a certain result. Let's look at diabetes. There are quite a few factors that could have some sort of responsibility in you developing diabetes. So one could be high blood sugar due to your diet. The second one could be high blood pressure. The third one could be smoking. The fourth one could be drinking alcohol. The fifth one could be a genetic disposition, and so on and so forth. The more factors you add, the more complicated your experimental construction is going to be. For that reason, there's usually only one or two factors that are being researched, but you have to make sure that all the others are excluded. Now, you can only exclude factors that you know may have a role in this case diabetes. But what about factors that you don't know about or that you think are not important? Let's say electromagnetic frequencies. Is it possible that someone who is in an office where there's like wireless and mobile phones and all kind of electromagnetic frequencies, and he's there for 8 hours a day, and then he's on the phone for hours talking, is it possible that the electromagnetic frequency could be somewhat responsible in him developing diabetes by damaging certain structures in his body? Of course. We can't say it isn't. We can't say it is because it hasn't been researched yet. But you really would have to exclude that as a factor. But how can you do that? You could pick people that have no electromagnetic frequency around at all. Good luck finding those. Otherwise, you would have to pick people that have a similar amount of electromagnetic frequencies around. And how are you going to measure that? So that is a factor that is probably neither excluded nor included, but it is something that has a probability of influencing your chance of getting diabetes. So just saying that, you need to look at what factors are tested and what are excluded. All right, guys, I'm going to end it here. I don't want to make it super complicated. Just be aware that it is important that you have a basic understanding of how scientific research papers work and see the danger of how easily they can be used and misused to manipulate people. Because most people will not bother to look up the original research, so you can just reference something, make an outlandish claim about it. You could outright lie, actually, because no one is going to check it, most likely, and then sell stuff or promote laws or whatever you want. It's just a great tool for mass manipulation. So be aware of that, and I see you next time. Stay safe.